Greetings, everyone. Today we will delve into the life of one of the most significant and contentious individuals in history, Karl Marx. To millions of people, he was a hero and a revolutionary thinker who championed the rights of workers and the oppressed. To millions more, he was a villain and the father of dangerous ideas that resulted in revolutions, conflicts, and political upheaval. But one thing is certain: Karl Marx is regarded as one of the world's most influential philosophers, even more so than Albert Einstein and Isaac Newton. In terms of influencing human society, his ideas didn't just remain in books, they sparked actual political revolutions, economic upheavals, and movements that are still going strong today. To comprehend his story, you must comprehend his hardships, ideas, and vision for society. Believe me, this is not just history. His ideas have a greater impact on your life than you may realize. For this reason, you must watch the entire story through to the end because, in addition to understanding Karl Marx, you will also see the world in a way you never thought possible. Prepare to learn something new. Karl Marx was born in Trier, Germany, on May 5, 1818. At the time, Germany was not a single nation as it is now, rather. It was made up of various small kingdoms and states under the control of the Prussian Empire. His mother, Henriette Pressburg, was a successful lawyer, and his father, Heinrich Marx, was a successful lawyer. This story will teach you about Karl Marx and assist you in improving your spoken English as you listen. He came from a wealthy family. His father was originally Jewish, but he converted to Christianity to avoid prejudice because Jews faced many restrictions in Prussia. From a young age, Karl demonstrated a great deal of intelligence and curiosity, excelling in literature and philosophy. His father hoped that Karl would follow in his footsteps and become a lawyer, leading a successful and stable life, but Karl had other dreams. He was captivated by politics, history, and the power of ideas. At the age of 17, Karl Marx joined his father was concerned and sent him to a more serious university, the University of Berlin, where Marx's life changed forever. He became deeply interested in politics and philosophy after being influenced by renowned philosopher Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, whose ideas shaped Marx's way of thinking. He had gone to the University of Bonn to study law, but instead of concentrating on his studies, he spent most of his time drinking, partying, and even engaging in actual sword fights. During this period, Marx joined a radical group known as the Young Hegelians, which questioned everything from religion to government to the structure of society. He began writing essays criticizing the government and religion, which made him a troublemaker in the eyes of the authorities. While studying in Berlin, Karl Marx fell in love with Jenny von Westphalen, a person who inspired him to think deeply about society, class struggles, and power. Jenny, a woman from a wealthy aristocratic family, was 4 years older than Karl and from a completely different social class. But they were in love and supported each other despite their differences. They became engaged in 1836, but their relationship was not easy because of Marx's political views and financial difficulties, which would make their lives very difficult. After finishing his studies, Marx wanted to become a professor, but because of his radical beliefs, with no job and no future in Germany, Marx chose to move to Paris, the epicenter of revolutionary ideas, in 1843. He and Jenny then moved to France, where Marx met another revolutionary. In 1842, Marx became the editor of a newspaper called Rheinische Zeitung, where he wrote articles criticizing the government, the economic system, and the struggles of workers. His writings were powerful and fearless, and soon the government shut down the newspaper. Friedrich Engels was the son of a wealthy factory owner, but unlike most wealthy men, he was deeply concerned about the poor working conditions of workers. Having lived in England for a while and witnessed firsthand how industrial workers suffered in factories, Engels and Marx met in Paris and realized they shared a common goal: to fight for the working class and to overthrow the capitalist system. Since Karl was constantly struggling within Paris, Marx studied economics and history extensively, reading about previous revolutions, economic systems, and class struggles. It was during this time that he began to formulate the ideas that would eventually become known as Marxism. He believed that history was shaped by the struggle between two classes: the rich and the poor, the owners and the workers. He contended that capitalism, a system in which businesses are privately owned, exploited workers and would ultimately collapse. In 1845, Marx and his family moved to Brussels, Belgium, where he continued his revolutionary work. This move was significant because, at the time, Belgium allowed more freedom of speech and political activism than other European countries. Marx took full advantage of this environment and began writing extensively about his political and economic theories, one of the most defining. The two had first met in Paris. But it was in Brussels that Karl Marx's friendship with Friedrich Engels, a German philosopher, social scientist, and businessman who shared Marx's vision of a classless society, deepened. Engels had first-hand knowledge of the working conditions in England, which he documented in his book The Condition of the Working Class in England. He noted child labor and economic inequality in factories. Marx and Engels saw capitalism as a system that benefited a small class of wealthy elites while oppressing the working majority. They decided to work together on a number of political writings because they wanted to develop a theory that would help workers understand and fight against their oppression. Marx and Engels spent a lot of time in Brussels developing the German ideology, a manuscript that established the basis for historical materialism. Unfortunately, the German ideology was never published during Marx's lifetime because no publisher wanted to take the risk of printing such a radical work. They claimed that human history is shaped by material conditions rather than ideas or religion, and that society is structured by economic forces. They also claimed that history is a series of struggles between different classes. This book was revolutionary because it rejected the prevalent philosophical ideas of the time, which focused on abstract ideas rather than material realities. He helped form the Communist Correspondence Committee, which connected socialist organizations and revolutionaries from various nations in an effort to create an international movement capable of fighting capitalism on a global scale. Marx also became heavily involved in practical political work during this time, giving speeches, writing articles, and attending meetings with workers. Later, he influenced innumerable socialist movements worldwide in Brussels. Marx and Engels joined the Communist League in 1847. A small group of radical thinkers who were asked to write a manifesto that would explain their ideas in a clear and powerful way. The Communist Manifesto, which was published in February 1848, became one of the most influential political texts in history. He wanted to spread his ideas beyond books and into real-world activism. And his efforts began drawing the attention of governments who saw him as a dangerous revolutionary. According to Marx and Engels, under capitalism, societies have always been divided between oppressors and the oppressed. The bourgeoisie, or wealthy business owners, were the oppressors, and the proletariat, or working class, were the oppressed. The manifesto called for workers to band together and overthrow the capitalist system and proposed radical ideas like the abolition of private property, progressive taxation, and free education for all. History begins with the famous line, "A specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism." Marx actively participated in revolutionary activities. But the Belgian government expelled him from the country out of fear that he would incite a rebellion. Marx moved to Paris, but he was forced to leave again after a few months. All and the centralization of banking were shocking ideas at the time, but they resonated with many workers who felt exploited by their employers. The year 1848 was a turning point in European history. He then relocated to Cologne, Germany, where he started a new radical newspaper called Neue Rheinischen. In his articles, he urged workers to demand better pay, fewer hours worked, and more rights. He also criticized the German government and the monarchy, which led to state repression. By 1849, the revolutionary movements had failed, and conservative governments had regained power throughout Europe. Marx was arrested and tried for his writings, but he was found not guilty. And the government outlawed his work. His newspaper and compelled him to flee Germany once more, leaving him and his family homeless, poor, and without a place to live. In 1849, Marx relocated to London, where he would live out the rest of his days. London was a city of contrasts, both the epicenter of global capitalism and a place of extreme poverty and inequality. Marx found himself in a position to study the system he had been criticizing. But he and his family also experienced extreme financial hardship despite his reputation as a revolutionary thinker. Marx struggled to support his wife, Jenny, and their kids. They lived in a tiny apartment in Soho, which is notorious for its subpar living conditions. At times, Marx was unable to pay for basic necessities, and Jenny had to pawn their belongings. Tragically, 3 of their children passed away from illness and malnutrition. This was a devastating reality that greatly affected Marx, who had to rely on his friend Friedrich Engels for support. Marx's life was characterized by ongoing struggles, but even with financial aid, Marx continued his intellectual work. He spent endless hours at the British Museum's reading room researching capitalism, economics, and history with the primary goal of developing a comprehensive critique of capitalism. Marx received money from his family's Manchester textile business. Without this support, Marx might not have been able to continue his work. Das Kapital, a seminal work, was more than just a book. It was a thorough examination of how capitalism operated, why it resulted in inequality, and why Marx thought it would eventually fall apart. He looked at how workers were exploited under capitalism, arguing that they produced more value than they were paid for and that capitalists, or business owners, kept the extra value as profit. This concept became known as the theory of surplus value. To put it simply, consider a factory worker who makes shoes worth $100, but the worker only receives $30. The factory owner keeps the remaining $70 as profit. Marx claimed that this was exploitation because the worker was not getting paid the full amount for their labor. Marx anticipated that workers would eventually band together and overthrow capitalism, establishing a society without classes, even though he was still living in poverty. Marx believed that capitalism created a system where the rich, the bourgeoisie, would always grow wealthier while workers, the proletariat, would continue to suffer. Marx was a prominent political figure who joined the International Working Men's Association, also known as the First International, which sought to bring together workers from various nations through speeches, articles, and debates. Marx disseminated his ideas and impacted socialist movements throughout Europe. But he also encountered resistance from governments who viewed him as a dangerous revolutionary and even from some socialist organizations who disagreed with his strategy. Many people found his writings to be overly complicated, and his theories were frequently misinterpreted or misrepresented. Marx's personal life was full of tragedy. His wife Jenny, who had always been there for him, was ill, and the loss of their children caused him great sorrow. Marx also experienced health issues as a result of living in substandard conditions. Excessive stress, and working too much, he had liver disease, boils, and insomnia. Despite these setbacks, Marx never stopped writing, and he continued to work on Das Kapital, though only the first volume was published during his lifetime. The subsequent volumes were finished, and Marx used the First International as a platform to promote his ideas. He wrote speeches, attended meetings, and debated other political thinkers. One of the biggest challenges was dealing with anarchists, especially Mikhail Bakunin, who believed that workers should be treated with respect to their rights. The book was published by Engels after Marx's death, and by the 1860s. His influence had begun to expand beyond small revolutionary circles. Argued that the state had to be controlled by workers before it could be abolished. These ideological disagreements caused a significant rift within the First International, which weakened the movement despite the conflicts. The First International helped spread Marx's ideas to workers in France, Germany, Italy, and Russia. His theory of class struggle struck a deep chord with industrial workers who faced poverty and exploitation, and many future socialist leaders drew inspiration from it. During this time, when Marx's ideas were gaining popularity, his personal life was still filled with hardships, including financial difficulties and deteriorating health. The stress of political work combined with inadequate medical care resulted in chronic illnesses for his wife, Jenny Marx, and their children faced constant threats of starvation. One of the most tragic events in Marx's life was the death of his son Edgar in 1855. Edgar was one of Marx's favorite after publishing the first volume of Das Kapital in 1867. Marx spent the following years working on the remaining volumes, but he struggled to finish them due to his deteriorating health and financial difficulties. His friend Friedrich Engels eventually compiled and edited the second and third volumes after Marx's death, the second volume focusing on the circulation of capital, or how money moves. His death left Marx devastated, and he became more reclusive and depressed, but he persisted in writing and working despite his grief. These works were much more technical than the first volume and were not widely read at the time, but they later became essential texts for economists and revolutionaries. One of the most important events influenced by Marx's ideas was the Paris Commune of 1871 after France was defeated in the Franco-Prussian War. Through various industries and markets, Marx examined how capitalists reinvest profits to maximize wealth. The third volume addressed profit, interest, and rent, explaining why capitalism leads to crisis. Rebelled, took over the city, and tried to set up a socialist-based government. Marx saw the Paris Commune as evidence that workers could rule themselves, but the French government violently put an end to it, killing thousands of workers. Marx analyzed the failure of the Commune and contended that future revolutions required better organization and planning. By the early 1870s, the First International started to fall apart because of internal strife and the division between Marx and the anarchists made it harder for socialist organizations to function in 1876, when the First International was formally disbanded. Despite this, Marx's influence persisted, as socialist parties started to emerge throughout Europe and Marxist ideas continued to spread. In the final years of his life, Marx's health deteriorated, he suffered from lung disease and other illnesses, and the death of his wife, Jenny, in 1881 devastated him. On March 14, 1883, Karl Marx died in London. At only a handful of friends and fellow comrades attended his modest funeral at Highgate Cemetery at the age of 64. Engels gave a eulogy, stating that Marx had transformed our understanding of history and society, saying, "Just as Darwin discovered the law of evolution in nature, so Marx discovered the law of evolution in human history." Even though Marx's personal struggles came to an end with his death, his ideas persisted and had an impact on the world. His writings were translated into many languages, and socialist movements throughout Europe and beyond adopted Marxism as their guiding ideology. His influence went well beyond his lifetime. In the 20th century, leaders like Fidel Castro, Mao Zedong, and Vladimir Lenin used Marxist ideas to shape revolutionary movements in their nations. Marx's ideas continue to inspire debates in economics, politics, and philosophy today. His concept of class struggle remains a central theme in discussions about social justice among universities, scholars, and activists. Without controversy, some critics contend that Marxism's practical application resulted in authoritarian regimes that betrayed the original vision of workers' liberation. Others maintain that Marx's critique of capitalism remains relevant, particularly when analyzing issues like income inequality, labor exploitation, and economic crisis. Whether one views Karl Marx as a hero or a villain, there is no doubting that he was one of the most influential thinkers in history. Despite living in poverty, facing political persecution, and losing many loved ones, Marx's life was full of intellectual struggles and an unwavering commitment to changing the world. Now, People study his works to understand the complexities of capitalism and the possibilities for a more equitable society. Friedrich Engels, his close friend and comrade, sat next to him on the day of his death. Engels later stated, on the 14th of March at 2:45 in the afternoon, the greatest living thinker ceased to think. Only 11 people attended his funeral at Highgate Cemetery in London. There was no grand ceremony or large gathering, just a few devoted friends. Nevertheless, Engels gave a powerful speech saying, "His name will endure through the ages," and so also few people at the time could have predicted how Karl Marx's ideas would alter the course of history, but within a few decades, his writing started to influence history. During the 20th century, revolutions spurred by Marxism took place in Russia, China, Cuba, and many other nations. But Marxist ideas were also misunderstood and abused, leading to some governments claiming to be Marxist turning into dictatorships that repressed freedom rather than fostering equality. Something Marx himself had never advocated. Karl Marx was never content with the world as it was. He asked profound questions about society, economy, and justice. We should also question unfair systems and think critically about the world. Despite the controversies, there are powerful lessons to be learned from his life. First, knowledge is power. Marx spent his life reading, writing, and learning because he believed that knowledge of history and economics is important. Could potentially help people change their lives, if you want to succeed. Never stop learning. 3. Even if you struggle, your ideas can change the world. 4. Money controls society, but it shouldn't control your mind. Marx witnessed how capitalism made people obsessed with money and profit, but his ideas shaped history. Your current struggles don't define your future, if you have a powerful idea. Keep working on it, it might change the world one day. Whether you consider Karl Marx a hero or a villain, you cannot deny his influence on history. His name is still up for debate. Some call him a genius, while others call him dangerous, but one thing is certain, he altered people's perceptions of society, class, and power. His words, struggles, and sacrifices demonstrate that one person's ideas can influence the future even after death, which is why Karl Marx is still regarded as one of the most influential thinkers of all time. The most significant individuals in human history. If you have watched this far, you are aware of Karl Marx's entire journey, struggles, ideas, and legacy. However, his story is not just about history, it is also about how we view the world today. If you enjoyed this in-depth series, please subscribe to this channel for more incredible and impactful tales that will inspire you to think, grow, and never stop questioning, learning, and believing that your ideas have the power to change the world.